My name's Kurt Vaughn. My background is in restoration ecology, specifically studying restoration of grasslands, and with a focus on how changing climatic conditions and changing biotic conditions affect the outcome of restoration projects in arid and semi-arid grasslands. That was what I did my kind of academic background in, and prior to coming to work with Borderlands Restoration Network, I worked with Audubon, California, working on habitat restoration, managing habitat restoration projects across the Sacramento Valley. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, thank you all again for joining us. And one thing I'll say before I get started is, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to add them to the chat. We're going to try to leave some time at the end to answer those, and also potentially some time to ask live questions if we don't use up all the space. But feel free to just pepper the chat, and we'll revisit at the end of my presentation, or at the end of Tess's presentation. So as advertised, we're going to be talking about a little bit about Borderlands Restoration Network's work and the Borderlands Wildlife Preserve, and particularly focus on a project that has the preserve as a central part of its efforts. That's focused on expanding and enhancing habitat along the path that we know that jaguar have moved in the past, and we're hopeful that they will move again in the future. Oh, there we go. So like I said, we'll talk a little bit about how we got where we are, what we do as an organization, how the Borderlands Wildlife Preserve came to pass, and then I'm going to pass it off to Tess, who's going to talk a little bit more about projects happening at the preserve, and with the focus on this particular project along the path of the jaguar. There's a little picture of El Jefe, the last known jaguar in our region. That shot is from 2015, I believe. So quick background for those of folks that are maybe not from the area, seem like a couple. Where we operate, and sorry, the words are tiny on here. There's Sierra Vista. Somebody who's coming from the Huachucas is here. Santa Rita Mountains. Tucson Metro is in this region here. We're coming to you live from Patagonia, which is right about here. This gray line is obviously the U.S. border between Arizona and Sonora, Mexico, and then there's New Mexico, Boot Heel, and Chihuahua there. The area, as you may know, is one of 20 regions in the world known as Sky Islands, which islands are certain types of habitat that are surrounded by dissimilar types of habitat. In this case, these aren't islands in the way that most people know them, but islands, inland islands, in a sense that these uplands are surrounded by arid lowlands that make crossing between those different places of habitat challenging. And the very interesting part of the Madrayan Sky Islands that we sit in is that it's the only Sky Islands that sit at kind of major crossroads. And you can see that in this map here. From the south, the highlands, the major highlands of the Sierra Madre, and then this stepping stone and north-south trending ranges that then go up to the Colorado Plateau. So it's really connecting those major influences from these different biologic regions that make this particular area really fascinating. And some people have termed it kind of the heartland of North America, because it's really pulling together not just those two highland areas, but influences from different lowland areas as well, from the Chihuahuan Desert to the east and Sonoran Desert to the west. So we sit at this confluence where we get all of these different, edges in ecology tend to be really fascinating places where you get overlapping diversity from the different groups. The island piece of that, the Sky Islands, also tend to have high numbers of endemics that live in a small number or a single mountain range. So added to that piece, and then that trending from north to south also provides the pathway for migrants. All of these different pieces add to the incredible biodiversity that we see in these areas. So just a little bit of background for those folks that don't know. I think it's not quite widely known the significance of the biodiversity of the Madrean archipelago, the Madrean Sky Islands. You know, bird folks know because they come here in droves from all over the world, particularly for the hummingbirds. But the pollinator species, some people have termed the area the pollinator capital of the world, bees, butterflies, and moths. And a piece that I think surprises a lot of people is the highest. It also boasts the highest mammal diversity in the U.S. You know, greater in the looking at the national forest level, greater than Yellowstone and some of those other parks. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got here as an organization. That piece before is why is this place of interest, and Jaguar being one of those fascinating animals that's drawn you here today. But I want to talk about why our organization is why we're here and how we've been inspired. And some of you may know this woman. This is Valeria Clark, an indomitable spirit who made a large life change about 40 years ago when she purchased a property in Southeast Arizona in the Chiricahuas and started to think about ways in which she could improve that property. In doing so, she started working with a crew of folks from Sonora who had long tradition and history of building rock structures in a kind of a co-learning environment. They've built tens of thousands of structures over time and really have made a dramatic impact both in Arizona and in Sonora, where now the organization that she founded, Cuenca Los Ojos, has improved, enhanced thousands of acres, has reestablished stream flow in different places, brought surface water back. You can see a before and after photo at the bottom. You can actually make out this fairly odd looking tree here in the before and after. And so her work really caught the attention of this other person that many of you may know, Dr. Ron Pulliam, who spent a long period of time since about the 70s in the region, and particularly first interested in grassland birds, but came to know and love the area now, and was inspired by the work that Valeria did, and founded Borderlands Restoration here in Patagonia to sort of take some of the lessons learned and start to apply the work that CLO had done as an inspiration to the region, our area. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of timeline. It jumps around a little bit, so you have to forgive me. From those original seeds planted by Borderlands Restoration, a couple years later, we launched a larger effort at a nonprofit. The Borderlands Restoration was actually the first social for-profit in Arizona, and the nonprofit was launched in 2018, which is when I joined the team. Really looking to expand on the work that CLO had been doing for decades and BR had started in the area, but also with an eye to coordinating, knowing that we had an expansive group of partners that were interested in doing similar work, looking to coordinate those efforts across the region. One of the big driving portions of our mission is to grow a restorative economy, and we do that by building the foundations of those economies, which are those ecosystems, restoring habitat for wildlife and people, and really trying to reconnect our borderlands communities to each other and to the watersheds in which they live. Real quickly, this is sort of the three-tier approach and that feed on each other, sort of what I just mentioned. Really, our focus is on reducing erosion and restoring surface flows. Once we kind of establish a little bit of extra water at sites, using low-tech strategies like rock detention structures, we can then go in and improve the biological recovery of that system, and really making a strong effort to involve community support at every step of the way. So we're really, all of our projects sort of involve all three of these elements. And just real quickly, some of the things that we have done since inception. So on the watershed restoration front, we've worked to install thousands of structures, improving, about 600 acres now, trying to get better numbers on how much soil that topsoil has stayed on the landscape, as well as how much carbon is in that soil directly, and then has been sequestered due to vegetation increases. But we're just starting to get some better numbers on those sorts of things. On the native plant front, we now have a fully functional commercial nursery. We just actually launched a new website for that nursery, and so we're expanding our operations, trying to expand production there to make really high quality restoration, high quality plants available for local restoration. We're really the only operation kind of in our ecoregion that offers these mid elevation plants suited for restoration. And then, as I mentioned, that third pillar is really education and outreach, and these have been some of our most successful programs. We've been running our Borderlands Earth Care Youth program for 9 years here in Patagonia, and we're just about to kick it off again. It really inspires and trains local youth to think about their home watersheds in a way that they can affect change. So switching now to the Borderlands Wildlife Preserve. And this is actually a study that Dr. Warren, I think you were part of. So in 2006, so here's where the timeline skips back a little bit. 2006, Game and Fish funded NAU to do a study identifying wildlife corridors across Arizona. One of those corridors was the Sonoda Creek Wildlife Corridor, and it was identified as a critical linkage for large mammals, including jaguar, bear, and mountain lions, bear and deer. As you can see from this map, so at the bottom here is the U.S. Sonoran border, and really there's, we here in Patagonia, we're really blessed to have an amazing amount of protected public land around us, and including these two wilderness areas. And we're also fortunate that in a way that the ways in which the geography and the topography trend with those protected areas really makes for a very good connection between these kind of two different districts of the Coronado National Forest. And what I mean by that is there's nearly a continuous ridge right along these little footprints that sort of guide wildlife through protected areas from basically down by the border up toward this other large district of the forest. The thing that is separating those two pieces is about 4 square miles of private land. And this blue outline is that Sonoda Creek Wildlife Corridor that was identified in that study. Right around 2011, I think, was no, there it is. Was the first sighting of, or first documentation of a jaguar in the whetstones, I think El Jefe was originally seen. This video is from the Santa Ritas. Once there was a known jaguar in the region, I think a bunch of cameras went up, and El Jefe was last seen in 2016. And just to see this animal moving in places, landscape that looks so similar to where I go on my weekends, is just amazingly inspirational. It's honestly a big part of the reason that I ended up here where I am. Let's see. Move on. Get out of there. Okay, sorry. I'm stuck in a cycle here. There we go. Too many screens open. So right around that time that El Jefe was being videoed in the mountains, Wildlife Corridor, so Ron Pulliam again pulled together this organization to in an effort to help protect those private lands that are critical to the border connecting the two forest districts. Let me see. Oh no, okay. And this map shows, again, that same timing. I think this is from 2013. This is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's identified critical jaguar habitat in our region. And for those of you that aren't quite as familiar, so this is the Huachucas here. This is the Santa Ritas. Patagonia is right in here, and the corridor that we're talking about is right in this region. And so this was identified as part of the Recovery Act for jaguar. And I also I included on here, just for folks that are interested, these red lines on the bottom are actually the places where border wall construction, 30-foot fencing has been completed. So you see it overlaps on the border a little bit with the eastern edge, right up into the National Memorial, and it just kind of comes up to the edge on the western side. The area in between is a mix of no fencing other than barbed wire fencing, cattle fencing, and some vehicle fencing. So this area is still this area of the border is still fairly open for movement across that border. This is a zoom in a little bit of to show. So now that the identified corridors in yellow running across, this is the southern part of the Coronado Forest, or the Sierra Vista district, and this is the Nogales district to the west, the two forest districts. This yellow part is now the Borderlands Wildlife Reserve. So in 2006, right around that same time that the study was coming out of NAU, this western portion, this yellow portion, was subdivided into 189 parcels. That, for context, if you take a look at the town of Patagonia, is about the same scale, about the same number of houses, and about a little bit of a larger footprint, actually. Fortunately, the economic recession of 2008 happened, and the developer lost it to the bank in 2009. It sat there for a while until Wildlife Corridors was able to purchase it in 2014. Since that time, we've been able to protect this area in yellow, which is about 1,000 acres, which is nearly half of the identified area in the NAU study. by the end of this year, we've been awarded a grant to protect another 500 acres here. We will use some of that revenue to buy additional properties on the east. For those of you interested, this kind of gray-blue area is area owned by Hud Bay for Rosemont mitigation. It isn't this part of it that is kind of within the corridor is lowland floodplain, is unlikely to be developed regardless of what happens sort of with the Rosemont mine. And just wrap up some of what's happened with the Borderland Wildlife Preserve since it's been founded and protected. We now have about 5 miles of trails that you can see here, including or not including a reroute of the Arizona Trail that will go through the northern portion. We have, I guess, 3 wildlife drinkers, a new one actually just installed across the highway in the new acquisitions. We now have some kiosk and water stations for people and some interpretive signs that we put out there. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Tess.
So hi everybody, my name's Tess Wagner, and I'm the Watershed and Habitat Restoration Program Manager for BRN. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you. So as Kurt mentioned, I'm going to be providing some more details about this specific project we just started called Along the Path of the Jaguar. I'll be providing some context for that. So this project is funded by the Wildlife Conservation Society Climate Adaptation Fund. So we're really grateful for them because without them, we wouldn't be able to be doing this work. So I'm going to start off by talking about the local landscape. So I'll start off with the watershed that we'll be working in for this project and talk about some previous work that we've done in this area, and then some potential work that we'll do for this project as well. Because restoration is the type of restoration we do is very iterative. So it's important to understand previous work and how this fits into that. Then I'll talk a bit more about the project context, so logistics of the grant, and then I'll link restoration with climate resilience because this grant is a large part of it is about climate resilience and adaptation. And I think, you know, linking restoration, which is a much smaller scale, to some of these broader ways of thinking, it really helps you get an understanding for what we're really trying to accomplish and what we're doing with restoration work. Then I'll talk a bit about the Jaguar and why the Jaguar is such an important conceptual idea for this project, and why the Jaguar corridor is so important to restore. And then finally, I'll go over some of the project goals, how we're going to meet these goals, and what we're going to be doing on the ground for this project, and give you some ideas of how you can get involved with volunteer opportunities and education events. So as I mentioned, I want to talk, first I want to talk you through a little bit about the watershed where we're working. And the reason I want to give this watershed perspective is because restoration inevitably deals with flows across the landscape, flows of material, of water, of resources. And to understand that, it's very helpful to understand how water moves through a landscape, because water is a primary transport mechanism across the landscape. So if we're figuring out where we want to restore and how we want to restore, we really need to understand these larger scale flows that are occurring on the landscape, so that we can better target where we want to work and how we want to work, and we can really make the most impact with the work we make. So this NAU migration corridor that, this NAU migration corridor that Kurt mentioned is part of the Sonoda Creek watershed. And the Sonoyta Creek runs north to south. It runs into the Santa Cruz River. It goes west into the Santa Cruz. And then I've highlighted these 3 canyons of particular importance that have tributaries to the Sonoyta Creek watershed. And the reason that these watersheds, these sub-watersheds are so important is because, first of all, you can see that they directly cross this important jaguar migration corridor. Second of all, they're upstream from everything that's happening at Borderlands Wildlife Preserve. So I was talking about flows, right? So everything that's coming through the preserve is coming from upstream from these 3 canyons. So if we understand what's happening in those canyons and we restore those canyons, you know, we're ultimately restoring the wildlife preserve as well. So the previous restoration work that we've done in the area, we've been working in Smith Canyon, as you can see. So the orange shows you these side drainages where we've been installing erosion control structures. And these structures have been for different grants, for different projects over the past couple years. And we've done a couple drainages in the preserve as well. And when we do this restoration work, we like to start high in the watershed. And the reason for this is because so again, it's all about the flows, right? And water, it follows gravity. It's pretty simple. And so we want to start high up, because if we restore the issues high up first, then we're keeping those issues from having cascading impacts downstream. So if we start somewhere in the middle, we're still getting all these, you know, these issues from upstream that are coming down and impacting us. So we really like to start at the top of the watershed and work our way down. And that's how we've been doing work in Smith Canyon. So these are some examples of the rock structures that we build. All of these are in Smith Canyon, so you can get an idea what this landscape looks like. There's these really beautiful oaky grasslands. We like to use native material whenever possible, so we use local rocks, we use down and dead wood, we incorporate vegetation and existing trees into the structures we build, with the goal of really slowing water, sinking it into the landscape, trapping sediment, and decreasing problematic erosion. So looking forward to this project as well into the future, these are areas that we're looking to continue restoration. And a tricky thing, of course, about looking at this watershed scale is that watersheds very infrequently align with sort of these arbitrary human boundaries that we make, such as, you know, property lines. But we've been really lucky, and that the Forest Service has been really great with helping us get the clearances we need to work in these places upstream of the preserve. So we have clearance to work in Smith Canyon and Stevens. We're working on Little Casablanca. So the plan for this project, first of all, we'd like to go back and revisit the work we've done in Smith Canyon. And the reason for this, again, restoration is an iterative thing. It's never really complete. So we want to go back. We want to look at the structures that need to be repaired and fix those. We can also build off of the work we've done before, add new structures there. So that's what we'll be doing in Smith Canyon. Once we've done that work, we'll move over to Stevens. And again, we'll start at the top of the watershed and work our way down. And then eventually, once the clearance for Little Casablanca comes through, we'll get started there, though that might be a different project in the future. We'll see, but that's kind of the trajectory of where we're going with restoration work in this area. So I'll talk a little bit more about specifics for the grant now. So the grant, it's a $244,000 grant for implementing restoration and increasing climate resilience along the path of the Jaguar. As I mentioned, it's funded by the Wildlife Conservation Society Climate Adaptation Fund, and the funding will go through October 2022. So this, as Kurt mentioned, there's a lot of components to the work we do, and this grant incorporates all of those. So there's a lot of pieces and a lot of moving parts that overlap. But we're doing some wildland restoration. We're doing some monitoring of our restoration effectiveness. We're also looking at enhancing community sustainability and reconnecting people with the landscapes that support them through education and volunteer engagement and that sort of thing. So I want to take you through real quick how restoration links to climate resilience, because I think that provides a really good understanding of really the importance of restoration work, and how it ties into not just the local scale and the watershed scale, but really more of a global scale. So let's start by thinking of Earth as being made up of a number of dynamic systems that all interact, overlap, and affect one another. And all of these systems, there's material and energy that are continually flowing through and between them. And these systems have evolved over time, over thousands of years, or tens of thousands, or even millions of years. They've evolved together, and in their dynamism, they've reached they all have this sort of equilibrium state, and they're accustomed to and adapted to the disturbances that are typical to the context that they have evolved with. So they're able to rebound on their own. But then human systems vastly complicate this. So human innovation has ended up resulting in rapid and drastic and novel disturbances in particular to climate, hydrologic, and ecological systems. And the reason that this is an issue, and such a big issue, is because we operate on much shorter timescales than these Earth systems, right? So we're the speed and magnitude of these new novel disturbances we're causing vastly outpace the ability of other systems to recover and adapt. So we're weakening these systems and unstabilizing them, and they're starting to spiral further from their equilibrium state. And of course, so, I stressed how all these systems are very interconnected. So of course there's cascading impacts. So the direct impacts that we have are things like, for climate systems, we're releasing greenhouse gases at an unprecedented rate into the atmosphere. For hydrologic systems, we're directly altering our waterways by pumping out groundwater and taking surface water, damming them. For ecological systems, we're introducing exotic species that can become invasive. There's a lot of land use change. So those are some of the direct impacts, but then all of those have cascading impacts as well. And in particular, the cascading impacts of climate change are particularly prominent and of particular importance, because the climate systems are an umbrella over hydrologic and ecologic systems, right? So they very much determine what's happening ecologically and hydrologically. So as we change climate, we're also having these secondary impacts that are vastly altering hydrology and ecology even further. And this is especially prominent in arid lands. And this is because arid lands, water is the limiting resource in arid lands, right? We have this both on temporal and spatial scales, right? We have this sort of hydrologic rhythm around which life really moves. So you see our waterways, and they're just this explosion of biodiversity and life and really robust ecology. And then of course we have this temporal annual season of we have our monsoons and our winter rains, and around these, all the ecology responds to that. And why this is so important is as we're starting to see the impacts of climate change, we're seeing that our arid lands are becoming drier. So this aridification is going to have even further impacts on ecological systems. So again, it's that cascading effect of all these things tied together and affecting each other. So then how does restoration fit into that? And that can be maybe a little bit difficult to understand at first, but first of all, restoration, the interventions that we're doing are addressing the direct impacts of humans on the environment, right? So we're putting in these rock structures, which are helping to slow which is helping to slow water flow and sink water into the ground. So we're helping to mitigate some of this over-extraction of water from our hydrologic systems. At the same time, we're putting in native plants that provide habitat, that provide forage, that provide nectar and pollen for the species that rely on them. So we're, again, we're directly counteracting these direct negative human impacts. At the same time, as we're working to restore these systems, we're kind of pushing them back towards that equilibrium state from which they've started to spiral away from. And as we're pushing them towards that equilibrium state, we're making them more resilient. And as we make them more resilient, they're going to be better at withstanding further disturbances. So such as the disturbances that climate change is going to be causing to them. So that's really how restoration fits in with this idea of climate resilience, and fits in with this more global context and larger scale systems thinking of what is going on. So then, why the Jaguar? So this, again, kind of there's a couple parts to this, and it's again sort of a question of scale in a certain sense. So not only is the Jaguar a completely magnificent creature, and the idea of restoring the jaguar habitat and migration path is just really inspiring to so many of us, and it's needed. I mean, about 50% of their range has decreased due to humans. But another part of this is jaguars have such a large range, so they rely on large-scale landscape connectivity, reliable water scattered across the landscape, and such a diversity of ecosystems. I mean, you can see from this map, right? Look at that range that they cover. It crosses 2 continents. It's pretty remarkable. So if we're talking about restoring jaguar habitat, we're also talking about protecting and restoring habitat for countless other species and ecologies and people. And we're talking about this really large scale landscape connectivity and restoring these large scale flows, which start on the small scale, but built up over time, we can get to those large scale impacts. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about details for this grant. So there are 3 main goals for this grant, and these they're very overlapping, and they integrate very well with one another. But it helps me to figure out what we're doing to think of it in these terms. So the first goal is watershed restoration. We really want to enhance climate resilience and strengthen environmental systems through watershed and habitat restoration. We also, community restoration, as Kurt mentioned, is a really important part of what we do. So we want to strengthen the relationships between local communities and the landscapes they occupy. And at the same time, we want to increase our understanding of what we're actually doing. So we want to quantify the impacts of the restoration interventions we're making, so that we really understand, what we're doing, and so that we can learn from the restoration we're implementing and make it better and better in the future. So for the watershed restoration portion of things, we're going to be installing 250 of these rock erosion control structures throughout the landscape to catch sediment, increase infiltration, help establish vegetation. So these are a few examples of those. In the middle and on the left, these would be structures we would place in a drainage perpendicular to stream flow, and they would help slow water, trap sediment, and so forth. And then the one on the right, that's a zinni bowl. That's another type of restoration structure we build, erosion control structure. And these are more for, we put these at head cuts to really stop head cuts from migrating further upstream. So it's really, that one's really to stop erosion in its tracks. So these are some examples of the type of structures we'll be building for this project. We're also going to be seeding and mulching 40 acres of bare ground to enhance wildlife habitat. And that's new for us. We recently got a wood chipper, so we're excited to get started on that and do that part of the grant. And then we'll also be seeding and outplanting at least 4,000 native plants in conjunction with the erosion control structures. And these 2 things, the plants and the erosion control structures, they have this really important synergetic relationship, right? Because as we're putting in these rock structures and then we put in the plants further help, the roots help really hold that soil in place. The organic material helps establish soil. The plants suck up water, so they're helping to retain water in the landscape. So these 2 things work really well together. We'll be helping them throughout this project. We'll also be doing community restoration, as I mentioned. So we'll be having events for volunteers to help us with plantings and building erosion control structures. We'll be providing 2 weeks of paid work for local high school students in the Borderlands through our BESSY program, which stands for Borderlands Earth Care Youth, which this gets back to that restorative economy idea, providing youth the opportunity to have paid positions in the field of restoration, restoring their local home watersheds. It's really a cool program. So we'll be providing some work for them through this grant. We'll also be continuing to develop and present educational information about restoration and climate resilience at public meetings, events, workshops, and webinars, similar, to what we're doing today. And then we're also starting to develop this rainwater harvesting program. And the rainwater harvesting program, it's really just getting started, and this is headed by Caleb Weaver, our youth education program manager. But we're looking at developing a rainwater harvesting program to bring backyard rainwater harvesting to local communities in the area. We recently received the water harvesting design certificate from Watershed Management Group, and we're figuring out how to make rainwater harvesting services available to a range of economic levels. Caleb is actually doing a presentation this evening about how to be better backyard water and ecosystem stewards. It's free, it's over Zoom. It's at 6 p.m. this evening. So if you have more interest in this, you should definitely check that out. I know I am. And then finally, our third goal. So increasing our understanding and quantifying some of these things. And this, I want to preface this by saying this is a very hard thing to do, because the restoration work we do is not occurring in an isolated lab situation. And what we're doing is really trying to connect these flows and connect these systems. So it's very hard to differentiate, what the exact impacts of one restoration structure is from, just the dynamics of the landscape. So this is hard to do, but there are a few things that we're looking at. So first of all, we have this, we're monitoring wildlife presence through camera trapping at the preserve. And this is headed by Choya Nickel. She has 7 or 8 cameras out there and gets all sorts of really cool images. So we're able to keep track of, who's on the landscape, how they're using it, that sort of thing. We're also going to be measuring all of the erosion control structures we place to quantify sediment capture. So that's exciting. We're using a methodology developed by Ron Tiller of ADEC. He's been really helpful with all of that. And then ADEC is also conducting pre and post restoration drone flyovers to really assess the landscape on a 3-dimensional level and see how our restoration interventions are changing the landscape. So here's a few opportunities you can get involved with. We have a couple planting days scheduled. Email me if you'd like to be involved with those to reserve your spot, and I'll sign you up. We have a watering day on September 3rd. This one may be canceled depending on monsoon rains. It would be great if we did have to cancel it, because that means we get good rain, but we'll see. So that one may or may not occur. And then we'll have an erosion control structure building day too. In October, where you'll learn more about how to build those and how to use them and where and that sort of thing. So again, email me if you want to be a part of that. And then we have a few upcoming educational opportunities. So as I mentioned, Caleb has this presentation this evening called Backyard Native Trees and Water Harvesting in Santa Cruz County. So that's over Zoom, and if you just enter that meeting ID, that'll take you to that presentation. We also have a couple native plant nursery management and propagation classes by Francesca Clavery, who's our native plant materials program manager, and she's awesome. You learn so much from her with those. Unfortunately, our in-person one is full right now for this Saturday, but there was so much interest, we added an online one. So if you'd like to be involved with that in July, email the horticulture email address and we'll get you signed up for that. And then visit our website if you want to, stay in touch about all other upcoming educational opportunities as well. So that's all I have for you today. I'm going to open it up to questions now. Kurt's going, sorry. Oh, yeah, here comes Kurt.
You've got the Jaguar photo behind you.
So we'll open it up to questions now.
Yeah, so feel free to add some questions to the chat. I don't.
Let's see.
or just go ahead and
Oh, wait, I can
raise your
stop
hand or
that.
speak up.
There we go.
One question from, is that the first one? Yeah.
I think so.
What impact have local ranches had on the restoration efforts? And so I think the question is, you know, how has the local ranching efforts affected the restoration effort? Can you clarify the question, please?
Yeah, this is Heather Thiessen-Riley. Yeah, I was just interested in the maps that you put up showing the different land holdings and the kind of the impact of ranching in this area and the relationship it has with your restoration efforts. Are you partnering with ranchers? I mean, you know, Valaire's not really a rancher, but you know, she's done amazing things on the land she owns. But how many active ranches are there in this area? How do you work with the ranchers? Are they good partners? Or, you know, what kind of challenges do you find with them?
That's a great question. So yeah, ranching is a traditional and current main industry in our region. You know, our high kind of mid-elevation grasslands are great place to do ranching. I'd say the answer to that is a little complicated. So in our particular area, there's a mix of folks that have more of a conservation minded, and there's a mix of people that are less conservation minded. There's a couple of folks on from TNC that have a number of conservation easements actually in the San Rafael area, right in the southern part of the map that I showed, that of the main corridor moving across. TNC also still owns the Los Fresnos Ranch, which is still an active cattle ranch, just on the other side of the border. There's also a couple folks on from Northern Jaguar Project who have much more experience working. I see Diana's here and Randy's there, who have much more experience working with ranchers where there are more jaguars. So I don't know, did one of you want to talk a little bit about your efforts?
Yeah, I'd be happy to say something about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Diana.
Oh, great.
Welcome.
Okay. Thanks for asking. And Randy, I'm sure will have something to add to this because he worked directly with the ranchers around the Jaguar Reserve for 3 years. So, okay. So what I would suggest is that you identify who the property owners are all along what someone, you said NAU has determined where the migratory jaguar route might be. If you have a healthy, successful migratory route for a jaguar, that means you've got a healthy, successful migratory route for all of the species of wildlife that umbrella covers. You know, so that means that you're going to have everything else is, if a jaguar can get through, everything else can get through. And I would think that having contact with all of the ranchers that are on that migratory route that's been, you said, determined by ASU, and having water sources that were especially open to wildlife would be a crucial thing that you could do. And I don't know, I think that you have got a lot of conservation or weekend ranchers that are now scattered throughout the San Rafael Valley. And I think those are the ones that could be most helpful in a situation like this, as well as the cattle ranchers who have to have water out for their livestock. And if you eliminated all of the stock tanks that are the dirt stock tanks for cattle. If you eliminated all of those, we wouldn't have Chiricahua leopard frogs. We wouldn't have water for all kinds of wildlife. The deer population would go down. I mean, those, I think that you have to consider those as crucial, as crucial elements of having healthy migratory routes. So I would think that mapping all of that and then entering into some kind of a friendly relationship with each one of those landowners along that route, whether it has anything to do with money or some kind of a sign on the gate to the ranch or to the property saying, I'm part of the Borderlands Restoration Network migratory route protection, or whatever, just some kind of a recognition, a thank you to those ranchers for helping with the project would be really important. Maybe having special meetings with them to have a special lesson in how to make the rock dams or how to make the Zuni bowls, or say, we'll come to you and spend Saturday morning showing you how to do water conservation. I don't know, Randy, what do you have to add?
Well, thank you, Diana. That touches on an area that we've been really thinking about, particularly the water availability,
Yeah.
not just for jaguar and things like that, but for, particularly for their prey.
Yeah.
They're not going to come through if there's no prey for them to be here, and if there's no vegetation for their prey to eat, their prey is not going to be here. If there's no water for their prey to eat, their prey is not going to be here. So focus. We've had a recent conversation with Sky Island Alliance, and we're wanting to maybe reach out to you guys at TNC to start to think about mapping out where those permanent water sources are, both on private lands but also on public lands. Sky Island Alliance has a good map of springs, but we don't have a comprehensive map of available surface water sources. So working with the ranchers to ensure that there is water available for, particularly in times of drought as we are in now, is something that we've been exploring. I have a hand up from Leaf.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so all of the work that was shown in Goal 1, is a lot of that damage just from poor grazing practices?
So the preserve was grazed historically. It is no longer being grazed. The area just upstream on the forest is leased and currently grazed. It's a little hard to untie multiple factors, but I think it's fairly safe to say that poor grazing practices have contributed to the increased erosion and kind of unzipping of the landscape, to use that metaphor, that's happened when headcuts kind of migrate up through these areas. Changes, there's other changes that are happening, so it's a little hard to totally point to that, but other changes being storms have been getting more intense over time, and just those impacts from those storms, either the impacts from the rain, a single raindrop can have a pretty big impact on the soil that it hits, but then the cumulative amount of water moving over the landscape can exacerbate any of those little nicks. So that is likely one direct human cause that has caused some of that erosion. Invasive species are another possible piece of that problem. And then I've got a chat question. Sure. Were there more jaguars in this area 100 years ago? From William. Yeah, the last, Tess showed a map of the historic range. Sorry, I'm out of the picture. which extended all along the southwest. And in Arizona, there were jaguar sightings. I think the last known female jaguar was killed in Arizona in the 60s, in 63 or something like that. And so there were jaguars in the region as much as 60 years ago. And then there are currently a handful of jaguars in Arizona.
One.
One, just one now. I think there was two. So they have been finding their way up into Arizona, back to the edges of the historic range. Only males at this point. And so we're quite a ways off from a potential population being established, but who knows, things can shift pretty quickly if we create a space that's welcoming for them and an ability for them to get here. I have faith that they will get here and they will thrive.
Could I add something
Sure,
on
of
that
course.
question? The last female jaguar was killed in the White Mountains during the 60s. And prior to that, some teenage boys killed one on the Santa Cruz River, and its stomach was full of frogs. So when you're talking about habitat restoration and prey restoration for jaguars, it includes all kinds that they eat. They're real omnivores. They eat all kinds of stuff, and they like javelinas. They apparently like javelinas better than they like deer. And when I was doing interviews with people in the San Rafael Valley 20 years ago, and particularly in Arabipa, several of the real old timers told me that they had seen herds of javelinas of up to 100 individuals all together at certain times of years. They would join up. And so I would think that javelina restoration for attracting large predators is one of the most important things that can be done.
Well, thanks for that. I had no idea. The frog thing threw me for a little bit of a loop.
Right.
They eat everything. They fish, they swim, they
Yeah.
eat
Turtles.
turtles. Turtles are a really common meal for them. They eat all kinds of different things. And I wanted to add on both things about the cattle tanks and the restoration work. When you have the opportunity to do restoration work up watershed from a cattle tank, you're doing a lot of filtration of that water before it gets there, and a lot of different effects. I mean, there's definitely the possibility of rehydrating a spring kind of setup when you do that kind of work, because those are obviously built in areas that are already flowing some water and have that ability. So that's one of those abilities to multiply the benefits of that restoration work too.
Totally. Thank you, Randy. Yeah, there's a long laundry list of amazing benefits that these erosion control, water detention, water harvest structures, however you call them, from water quantity to water quality, to available surface water for right there for animals to drink,
and surface vegetation.
Yeah, to cooling effects, all these amazing benefits that this really low tech and fairly low cost solution has. So if anyone's anyone's a landowner and is interested in learning a little more about how you can implement this practice on your home place, reach out to us too. If you have any further questions about this, we want to respect everyone's time, and we're just at 1 o'clock here. So if you have any further questions, reach out to Tess or myself. But we want to thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.